I started Polinode as a platform for organizational network analysis to make ONA more accessible and easier for people to use inside of organizations. And so over the last 7 years, the ONA space has changed quite a lot. I've noticed quite a lot of changes. And that's what I want to talk about today, is some of the emerging trends and kind of the future directions in ONA. But before I get to that, I just want to give you a little bit of background, kind of specifically what is Polinode, and a little bit, I know we've had a few discussions about it already, but a little bit about what ONA is as well. So as I said, Polinode is a platform for organizational network analysis. And at the core of ONA is, of course, networks. And so at the heart of Polinode is this ability to interactively visualize and analyze network data. So to calculate a number of different metrics, different types of centrality, to find out who the bridges are in the network, to detect different informal communities, and to also look at collaboration by different metrics like division or function or gender as well. And what's come up a few times over the last couple of days is this idea or difference between active ONA and passive ONA. So I just want to spend a minute on the difference between that. And so active ONA is where you ask people questions. So ask people questions about their relationships with others. And those questions are things like, who do you go to for advice? Who do you view as a mentor? Asking people about knowledge, about energy, about innovation, and really collecting, sometimes a great deal of detail and valuable information about the strength and nature of relationships that people have with other people. And so Polinode includes a fully integrated survey platform that allows you to collect that relationship data because it's specifically designed for collecting that kind of relationship data between people. And the other type of ONA is passive ONA. And that's where you use the digital exhaust of a company. So that's often email metadata and also increasingly enterprise social network data and other sources of data as well. So Polinode includes an integration with Office 365, but also the ability to upload literally any type of connected data at all with any type of attributes associated with that data. So think HRIS demographic data like tenure, performance, etc. Really important question, why? Why ONA? And so here I just want to give 5 kind of bread and butter reasons. And they are identifying influences. So particularly for purposes of change management. The second is understanding and improving collaboration. Where are there silos in our organization? Where are groups perhaps collaborating more than we might expect them to collaborate as well? The third one is finding emerging or hidden talent. Who's flying under the radar in our organization? The fourth is M&A integration, or kind of large-scale structural changes, so demergers or things like that as well. And the fifth is onboarding and succession planning. So how effectively are we integrating people into our network as well? So now let's talk about the future. That's the background, that's Polinode, and that's a little bit about the use cases of ONA. But where is it going? What are the future directions of ONA? So the first is unlocking the data, the network data, and combining it with other data sources and thinking about it in the broader people analytics context. So attrition is a really good example here. So if you imagine A is connected to B and B is connected to C, what happens if person C leaves the organization? Intuitively, there is signal in the relationship data such that people that are more connected to C are more likely to leave the organization. And so we've done a really interesting project with Data61 at the CSIRO recently using graph-based machine learning methods, and we found exactly that there is signal in the relationship data around attrition. The second emerging trend that I want to talk about, and this is something that Melanie touched on in her presentation, which I found really interesting as well, is the use of ONA for org design. So for a long time, we've spoken about using ONA to understand how work really happens and about the informal structure and comparing that to the formal structure. But there is also the ability to use ONA to help inform and improve the formal structure of an organization. So using community detection, for example, to find those people that are working more closely together and making an organization more efficient as a result of that as well. Third emerging trend, combining active and passive data. So when I first started talking to people about ONA, people would come to me with something very specific in mind that was either they were convinced that they wanted to do passive ONA or convinced that they wanted to do active ONA. But more recently, over the last kind of 12 to 18 months, as the awareness of the passive ONA and active ONA has increased, people are starting to use the two together. So to give you a concrete example around org design, it's really helpful to ask people questions. Who do you want to work with more, for example, for an org design purpose? So an active ONA, but then to use the passive data to understand over time at a higher frequency how people are actually changing in terms of who they're working with as well. Individual network reports. So consistent with another theme of this conference around using people data for good, I think it's really important to give things back to the employees who participate in ONAs as well. And this too is an emerging trend. So here, there's a couple of screenshots from an individual network report that Rob Cross and I have developed. And the idea behind individual network reports is to give people insights into their position in the network, and also how they compare to their peers, and to use it in terms of learning and development to help them take that knowledge and understand and ultimately improve the way that they relate in terms of the overall network. And the fifth emerging trend that I want to talk about is diversity and inclusion. And so diversity and inclusion, in truth, is not terribly new in the ONA space. So it's been around for a while. But what is new is the amount of interest that people have in diversity and inclusion. Again, probably in the last 12 months, there's been a real increase in interest in diversity and inclusion. So to the point that, particularly in the US, more than half of the enterprises who I talk to in the US, the #1 use case for ONA there is diversity and inclusion. So what do we do today? Well, we can examine things like collaboration by gender. So what you see on the slide is a summary of collaboration by gender. And we can slice and dice that in a bunch of different ways. We can look at it by division, by different levels of seniority as well, by location. But also there is complexity in this topic too. So you can think about there are confounding factors when we look at collaboration by gender, because typically, particularly when it comes to nominations of people will tend to nominate people that are more senior than themselves. And for a bunch of organizations, more senior parts of the organization tend to be more male. So there's a confounding factor when we look at D&I in that context. And so what's coming down the pipeline here is more advanced statistical methods to kind of dig into that and understand it more, to really answer the question about which areas of our organization are more and less inclusive, particularly from a gender perspective. Thank you.